Greetings and salutations, travelers of the internet. Welcome to the Lit Round Table. I'm Joseph.
And I'm Anna, and today we'll be your wise or not so wise mentors for today's audio adventure into all things storytelling. And today we're going to talk about book banning and why it's so important to tell and listen to stories that feature diversity.
And I feel like we have touched on book banning in a previous episode.
We have for sure, early on, like year one of the podcast, we did a whole episode on banned books during Banned Book Month.
Yeah.
Or week or whatever.
You have since, gone to grad school and,
Right.
maybe now have, a better, not better, but, a different viewpoint.
Yeah. My opinion, it's funny. I feel like when we first talked about banned books on here, we took a stance of and I think we've mentioned this, but if this is the first time you're listening to us, here's some context for you. When we first approached the banned book topic, we approached it from lots of things get banned for kind of silly reasons, and you shouldn't let that deter whether or not you read a book. Since then, there's definitely been since we recorded that podcast, there has certainly been an uptick in the number of book bannings that are happening. And there's been an uptick in legal ramifications to educators and libraries having certain titles in their collections and teachers in their classroom collections. So it's kind of a hot topic right now in library science because we talk a lot about whether or not libraries are neutral spaces. And the answer to that is yes, but no.
Yes, within reason.
Neutral spaces in the sense that the libraries should have materials for everybody. There should be everyone's voice should be present. However, some voices would dictate that other voices not be present. And so you have to walk this line of to be neutral is potentially damaging to minorities.
Because at what point is your tolerance what happens if you're tolerant of intolerance?
Well, and a huge issue is that there are certain organizations and groups that will organize mass challenges on certain titles without having read the book because they heard that it featured something that they did not like.
Sure. Yeah.
And so there's the 10 most banned books, the things that I think it was 2023, because we don't have the numbers for 24 yet, obviously. But in the last 3 years, consistently, for sure, have featured main characters or themes that involve LGBTQ issues. That's the majority. And then the other titles also feature, what's being called critical race theory. But it's basically titles that feature people of color and their struggle. So I think that shift, because when we talked about it before, it was a lot of satanic panic was kind of the motivation for book bans, which now I think is generally considered to be kind of absurd. I could be wrong, but that's my you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I think that a lot of people hear satanic panic now and they kind of cringed, ugh.
Right.
I mean, but I feel that's still a pretty recent shift. Even when we were kids, there was some of that still still existed in the 90s and early 2000s. But now it doesn't seem as prevalent. I feel it just shifted fonts, it's
for sure.
It's the same thing, and I feel it's the same type of mindset, because
100%.
some people would view like LGBTQ content as satanic.
Right. Correct.
So it's still the satanic panic for some people, because
right.
they're literally demonizing gay people. But anyway.
Right. Yes. So what I meant by that was, I should have articulated this better.
No, I wasn't like critiquing what you said. I'm just
no, I know.
Yeah.
I know. I think that previously, like when we talked about this, our understanding was that like there was some racism that was like the motivation, but it was majority like witches and magic.
Yeah.
And like those kinds of things that were getting banned.
Yeah.
But a lot of those titles, or in a lot of those themes, also supported diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now it's just people are less afraid of just being bold about what they don't want to see.
Yeah.
Or what they're actually trying to demonize. Which is scary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it all boils down to my worldview is correct and true, and I'm going to invalidate yours.
Correct.
And make you feel like your experience as a human is wrong. And that's how you get censorship and people's ideas getting shut down, and you get stuck in a bubble where you don't hear any other viewpoints and any other like walks of life, and you think that the way you've been living life is like all there is. But then like, I don't know, I feel like Western culture especially is very like that. Like there's this bubble. Like if you want to kind of burst your bubble, go visit like an Asian country, or even like, I mean, African countries, South American countries, like getting away from the white European Western civilization mindset.
That you had a key word in there.
Yeah.
White.
Yeah. I said what I meant.
I know you did. I just wanted to make sure and put a highlight on that. So in a lot of my classes, we talk about, and I know that this is going to be frustrating for people, but get uncomfortable, I guess, because that's the only way you can grow. And growing is so important.
Trust me, I'm familiar with being uncomfortable and growing.
Same. Like this is, I feel like this is important to talk about because I have been in both camps.
Yeah.
And so I'm still growing. But I think an important part of that growth is to admit that like there was something wrong before.
Yeah.
So
always growing, always healing, always discovering new ideas and thoughts, and exposing yourself to a diverse worldview or other worldviews, which is, I think, healthy.
Yeah. So my first semester of this program, I took a social justice and youth literature class, which was mentioned on the pod and talked about in some of the books we were reading.
Yeah.
And that laid a pretty significant ground floor for the rest of my time in the program and the choices of some of the classes I would pick. And this summer I've been taking children's materials and teen materials, and we've had whole weeks dedicated to talking about this issue for youth literature. And I mean, that's what's primarily getting banned, right, is books for kids. So not that there aren't adult books that get banned, but I feel like these movements and these organizations that are trying to get things banned and criminalized are focusing on things for kids because it's kind of a cop-out. Like, it's easy to say, well, I want this banned because I'm protecting the kids. And if you don't agree with me, you want to hurt kids. And that is not... It's a logical fallacy, and it's wrong. Point blank. So... but one of the reading assignments was from Kirkus Reviews, and the article is called "Unmasking the White Default." This was written by Vicky Smith in 2016. So, I mean, this is not a new thing that people in literature spaces are trying to rectify. Because when you look at children's literature, it's proportionately wild to see what demographics are represented. There's an alarmingly small amount of indigenous folks represented in children's literature, like less than 1%.
I have a thought. I have a thought on that if we can pause on the indigenous side of things. Do you think that maybe that is because there was a lot of like white guilt that is associated with indigenous people, and people like to just brush it under the rug and pretend like it never happened and pretend like they don't exist?
Yeah,
because that's the impression I get.
I think that is a huge component. I don't think that makes it right, but I do think that is a factor for sure. I think that there's a lot of guilt around, or white guilt around Black people too.
For sure, yeah.
And silencing those voices.
It's just interesting that like the guilt like somehow causes, intentionally or not, like it perpetuates a culture where they're still being silenced. Even though
and they are. Yeah,
even if it's because like you feel guilty about what happened to Native Americans and you don't like to think about it or acknowledge it, well, you not thinking about it or acknowledging it is only making it worse, because now
because indigenous folks do still exist, and they have vibrant culture and history and stories to tell, and by not including those stories and by not representing them in children's literature, we're perpetuating this cycle for sure. There's also a disproportionately low number of Asian representation and Pacific Islander representation. And then I think next, I could be getting this flipped, but I believe next is Latinx representation, and then Black folks, and then there's a huge number of books that are about animals or inanimate objects as main characters, like robots and cars and things like that. And then it's like, the highest percentage is white characters.
Yeah.
There's a graphic. I'm going to send it to Joseph so that he can maybe put it in the video. And we'll have like... So you can see it.
Yeah. And I feel like those same statistics can probably be reflected in the authorship of the books as well. Like the majority of children's book authors are white.
Absolutely.
And because I feel like if you're going to author a book about like a Black child or an Asian child or whatever, it would feel wrong to me a little bit if the author was white trying to write about the experience of those other races. So I feel like publishing companies need to do better.
Oh, for sure.
At publishing POC authors. I feel like that's kind of, well, the root cause is like a worldview issue, but I feel like a very significant chunk of the root is like the publishing companies prioritizing white authors.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the history of publishing, it started out as majority white men in publishing.
Yeah.
It's still disproportionately white men, but now also white women in a lot of children and YA circles. And that's generally because children's and YA formats are considered lesser than books written for adults.
Less sophisticated. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the publishing industry has a huge power issue in general. That's like a whole other topic, but it's very closely related to this one. So but yeah, so this article, Unmaking the White Default, read this for class this last week and felt like it was really significant because Kirkus Reviews is a highly regarded website and magazine that reviews books.
Mm-hmm.
And they do commonly, and they've been making an effort to indicate whether or not main characters and secondary characters are people of color and how they're identified. Sometimes, I mean, I've read reviews that were like, ambiguously Asian. Like, this characters, we don't know, but they're presented as Asian,
Yeah.
but not, like, specifically identified. And then so Vicky Smith, who wrote this article, I don't know if she still is, but at the time, she was the children's and teen editor for Kirkus Reviews. And so there was a lot of, like, discussion around, well, if we're pointing out when there are people of color in these books, should we also point out when there are white folks? Because if we only point out when there are people of color, then we're assuming that the default are white.
Yeah.
And there's a problem with that because depending on where you live, that might not be true.
Mm-hmm.
So, or depending on your community. So, she specifically mentions Bud Not Buddy, which I have not read. Have you read Bud Not Buddy? I remember all my classmates reading it, but and yeah, I didn't read it as a kid. And I think that I had a unconscious bias to not read it because I had a perception that it was for black people and I was not black, so why would I read it? Which is not great.
I feel like it's, again, like, there's like this desire to stay in the bubble, right?
Right.
Like, where it's comfortable.
Right. I'm talking about, this was like 6th grade. Like,
yeah.
This was a long time ago.
I mean, adults don't like being uncomfortable.
Right.
6th graders definitely don't like being uncomfortable.
Right. But, so she specifically mentions Bud Not Buddy because you go through the book, and everyone is just referred to as sir or ma'am until the main character goes to a library and he mentions the white lady behind the counter. And then suddenly, readers have to reevaluate, oh, why is he specifically calling this person a white lady? What have all the other people been? And then you realize that you've had this subconscious assumption that everybody in the book has been white the whole time.
Yeah.
And in this case, that was not the community that he lived in. The white lady at the library was what was unusual in the community. So, like when you come across something like that and you think, oh my gosh, I've been reading this book all wrong, it is important to know, like, what you're reading. And if you're a teacher or a librarian or an educator of some kind and you're trying to develop a collection of books to help the students in your classroom or the community that you're working in feel seen, then it's important to be able to find books that do feature diversity. And so part of Kirkus Review's ideology is that they will continue to include and say whether or not the main characters are black or white or indigenous or Latinx, whatever their background is. And if it's not mentioned, they'll also say that. So,
yeah.
Because they want people to have the resources they need at their fingertips, even though she admits that it's often very uncomfortable for herself and reviewers to do so because it is forcing them to think about the literature they're reviewing in a way that is not frequently how they think about it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's
Am I articulating
new.
that very well?
It's very new, and it's something that's interesting because, do they also like say whether or not something is like LGBTQ plus.
Yes, they do also.
Okay.
Yeah. This article is specifically talking about whiteness, but yes,
Yeah.
they do also. The reviews will say they won't necessarily say that. Okay, you're bringing up a good point.
Mm-hmm.
I have noticed that they specifically will mention if a character is part of the LGBTQ community, but they do not necessarily
In what way?
indicate if they're straight or not.
Yeah. Because LGBTQ,
and they'll normally say trans or
okay, I was going to say
or sapphic or whatever. But
because if all of it says is LGBTQ, that does not give you enough information to know what
no.
kind
It's
of
such a
book
broad
it is.
spectrum,
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
But I think you're bringing up a valid point in that we should also then be indicating whether or not something is straight or straight passing.
Because really, like, whenever you're reading a new book, it does feel like you're pointing this out to me right now. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally true. It feels like you assume that everyone is white and straight until proven otherwise.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, you and I for sure do that.
Yeah.
Because that's how we were raised, and that was our community, was largely that.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what we believed at the time.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing to unpack. That unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something, the whole white and straight by default, there's also like an interesting male by default thing that happens sometimes too, that this kind of like brings to mind, like the NBA and the WNBA.
Right.
Like there's either the NBA or there's the women's NBA, you know, or like there's the chess association, and then there's the women's chess association. Like it's always like this is a sport or it's a competitive thing, and it is either like for dudes unless proven otherwise, or it's like at least mixed gendered until you have to put like this is the women's thing. It's like it just kind of strikes the same chord for me of like, oh, how come it's not the MNBA and the WNBA? How come it's just the NBA and the WNBA? Like with the whole pointing out whether or not something is white or not.
Yeah.
Like
totally.
It's assuming that men is the default for sports.
Right. You're right on, dude. It's all the same issue.
Yeah.
It's all the same issue, just in slightly different wrapping paper.
Different font.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's one part in this article, and this article will be linked so that you can read the whole thing yourself. But Smith says, there's the fact that because white is the default, oftentimes it's hard to tell whether a book is being consciously race neutral, like Virginia Ewer Wolf's Make Lemonade, or whether an author simply isn't one for physical description. There's the fact that a child in a picture book may look white, but be a child of color, particularly if an artist's approach is stylized. And then there's a fear of getting it wrong, which we've done, as when we misidentified Eric and Terry Fan's Asian eponymous Night Gardener as white. So, like, you can be doing your best and still make mistakes.
Yeah.
And have the best of intentions and still make mistakes.
I feel like so long as you, like, acknowledge your mistakes and correct yourself, like, because I feel like we're going to make mistakes because we were all raised in different environments with different, like, cultural or, like, social cues and different cultural stuff.
Yeah.
Like, so do black people read a book and assume that everyone's black until proven white? Like, I feel like that's what that one book was trying to do that you're talking about.
No, but not Buddy, yeah.
Yeah, but not Buddy. But, like, do people from other, like, cultures do that? Or is this because that it's such a white-dominated, like publishing is so white-dominated that that's just become the norm for everybody? Like, even if you are a person of color reading a book for the first time, I'm just wondering if they would also assume that they're white unless proven otherwise.
Great question.
And as
I do not have
a white person, I was going to say, you probably don't know I'm just verbalizing my thoughts, I suppose.
Yeah, but you're bringing up something else. So one of my classes, we had a guest speaker who specializes in studying manga and manhwa
Cool.
in anime.
Nice.
And this is in my
I want that job. How do I get that job?
Yeah. She was talking about how in manga, like she showed us different panels, and she was like, how do you assume these characters would be racially identified, even though they're black and white panels, and you can't see skin tone? How would you assume that these characters are being portrayed? And like, as white Americans, my default is 100% white. As wrong as that is. I'm trying to correct that.
Yeah.
But in manga, the default for the artists is Japanese. So you should assume that every character that you come across in manga is Japanese. Unless, and then she had identified several characteristics that would portray them as a different race.
Yeah.
So, like, if a character is, generally speaking, if a character is fat or has a lot of wrinkles in their facial descriptions, they're American.
Or blonde, maybe. Like blue-eye blonde.
But I'm saying for not colored. So there's no coloring.
Oh, because it's black and white. Yeah, you're right.
Black and white panels. And so that was fascinating to be on the other...
That's funny.
The other side of the coin.
To get stereotyped.
Yeah, which, I mean...
Fair.
Stereotyping is not great regardless.
It is interesting to be on that end of it, though.
It is. When you're used to being the default,
yeah,
to suddenly not be the default and then have the identifiers be less than appealing characteristics. But, yeah.
Interesting. Because there are some manga and anime that are like Eurocentric, like Vinland Saga.
Right.
Everyone's white in Vinland Saga because it's about Vikings.
So this is, of course, there are exceptions.
Yeah. But it's interesting, though, because it seems like they're still drawn in a very, like, manga style, where, like, you could almost just say they look Japanese, like, because they look like other manga protagonists or characters, but, like, they're Europeans. I don't know. It's interesting, like, the way that the art styles can differ between artists, but yeah. Still, though, I want that job. I want to analyze manga, manhwa, and anime.
Well, I think she's just an academic, so not just, but I mean,
yeah.
I don't think it's a job title.
Well, it should be.
She's an academic researcher, so yeah. There's so much on this. There's also a lot of discourse around, like for a long time, anytime you saw a book that featured a Jewish protagonist, it also heavily featured Jewish trauma around the Holocaust.
Sure. Yeah.
And how Jewish folks deserve literature where they get to exist without being in danger of genocide.
Yeah.
And the same with black folks. Like, they deserve books where they get to experience black joy and not just be recovering from a history of slavery and racism. Like, they deserve to exist and be happy and have the same kind of stories that white folks get to have written about them.
Which is why I love Into the Spider-Verse.
Yes.
I love those movies.
It's so good.
Miles Morales. So cool. Sorry, that's
I think
rabbit trail, but
No, this is perfect. So, yeah, I mean, we grew up with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man.
Oh yeah.
And loved them. Like, there's something very special about that first Spider-Man movie. But I could easily accept and maybe even make the argument that the Miles Morales Spider-Man is superior.
Yeah. I think that I'm just trying to now you've got like I'm trying to like my brain is trying not to go into like comparing the two based off of like their powers and their feats and like their like and just looking at
Right.
it from like a storytelling perspective and not like an actual
Mm-hmm.
like who would win in a fight.
Oh no,
Miles
I'm not
Morales
talking
or
about.
Peter Parker. No, I know, but
I'm
like
not
that's where
saying who
my
would win in a fight at all.
no, I know, but that's like where my brain went automatically when you
Sure.
say like one is better than the other. That's like where my brain went automatically, and I was just trying to like correct my brain and be like, no, that's not what she's talking about. Stop it.
No.
That's not what she's talking about.
Well, no, and I mean the beauty of Into the Spider-Verse is that you get to see all the different versions of Spider-Man.
Yeah, man.
It's very cool.
Yeah, I think Into the Spider-Verse is like peak Spider-Man content for sure.
Yeah.
With Miles Morales and Peter B. Parker.
Mm-hmm.
I love what's his name? He's the guy from New Girl.
Jake Johnson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His delivery. And Gwen Stacy, Spider Gwen.
Yeah.
I love them all. But yeah, I think that's a great that franchise is a great example of like experiencing black joy. And like I mean his dad's black, his mom's Puerto Rican. So he's mixed. And I think that's also like cool representation there. And also it's like you get the black joy part of it, and it's also a superhero movie.
Right.
Where he's literally taking the mantle of a superhero that began and was traditionally a white character.
Correct. Yeah. Right, and I mean, saying that books deserve to have, and people deserve their books to have joy in them, doesn't mean that they're not also going to face difficulty.
Yeah.
Or still have to face racism.
But every movie
everyday
about
things.
But every movie about black people doesn't have to be 12 Years a Slave.
Exactly.
And every book about Jewish people doesn't need to be The Diary of Anne Frank.
Correct.
Like, they can be happy. They can,
They can have a full spectrum of emotions and experiences, and it can be a beautiful thing.
And if you're Indigenous or like Native American, every story about you doesn't have to be the Trail of Tears. Like it can be, and your family doesn't have to own a casino. Like, good grief.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Like,
what about all the white children? What if we hurt white children's feelings by having books about people of color?
I know you're like.
I'm intentionally affecting a whiny voice for this.
Yeah. You're being yes. Yes. I just don't understand how that can be your take. Like, it literally baffles my mind. What do you mean? What about the white kids? They've had literally all of this content fed to them on a silver platter their entire existences.
Right.
And it's not like there's going to be like they're not. Oh, are you afraid that suddenly there's going to be no stories for your white kids to relate to? That's all they've got.
Right. Yeah. I mean, frankly, you're correct. There is a huge plethora of content for white kids if you only want to spoon feed them content for white kids. But I would challenge you. Exactly. I would challenge you and say that is not actually a healthy way for your kids to experience literature and the world around them.
Yeah.
Because the world is not just white. And your experience of the world as white is not complete.
And like America is certainly not just white.
No.
We're a big melting pot for a reason.
I have gotten so much out of reading middle grade children's books and YA books that feature and celebrate voices of color and LGBTQ characters.
I mean, the Broken Earth trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies that I've read and one of my favorite ones that we've ever done read-alongs for.
I do need to qualify that the Broken Earth trilogy is not a children's series.
No.
Okay. I just said all these children's formats.
Right. But then
so
you listed all the things.
I just want to make sure that we were saying that the Broken Earth because it is not. Do not give
No.
those books to your kids, please.
Only if you're ready to have some real adult conversations.
Right. You for sure need to read them first. I think that there are high school students that 100% could read and handle them.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But I think that as a parent, you need to be prepared.
But what I meant was those are books that have, like, almost all of the characters are people of color.
Right.
To varying degrees. Like, some people are darker than others, but, like, they're all very, like, African coded, right?
Yes. Yes.
You have people in the LGBT community that are gay, bi, what have you, trans, good old Tonki. I love me some Tonki. She's great.
She is.
Like, it has everything.
It does.
And then it checks like almost every box in the diversity column, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just very cool. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah,
I feel like you shouldn't want your kids to grow up only reading, like, because yes, people of color are often talking about representation. My kid needs representation. Yes, because like that's important. Seeing a black man dressed as Batman is important for black kids.
Right.
Was Batman ever black? Like traditionally in the comics or in the canon?
I have no idea. Probably not.
Probably not, but who cares, man? It's Batman.
Right. Well, it's the same with... So Magic the Gathering came out with their Lord of the Rings set.
Oh, I love that.
They feature many of the characters that Tolkien would have portrayed as white as people of color. Black Aragorn is stunning.
He's so cool, man. He's so cool.
I'm here for it.
Yeah.
100%. And I think it's so cool that folks that have loved the Lord of the Rings get to experience this art that puts them in the spotlight.
Because the thing
is...
Of
the main characters.
Yeah. Like, if you want to be a Tolkien purist, cool. You still have the books.
Right.
You still have, like, the main source material. That's fine. But there are a lot of people that are people of color that enjoy the franchise and have never felt represented, and now they do. So, like, relax.
For sure.
Let people enjoy things. Yeah. But, man, I love that art for that. All the art for the Magic the Gathering, Lord of the Rings set is just absolutely brilliant and beautiful.
So one of my other jumping off points for this topic was that, and I talked about this last month, was that I read the book Gender Queer for class as my banned book choice, because it's like the most banned book.
I feel like I've heard of it, actually. I have heard of it.
Yeah, because you've heard of it, but also we talked about it last month.
Yeah, I think what I mean is I had heard of it before you mentioned it.
Gotcha. So since having recorded that, I had to do like a write-up on it. And I found a review by the Equal Opportunity Reader. And it's from Mel the Bookworm. And she is a black content creator. And she talked about a lot of the things that I had mentioned with genderqueer, that it helps give words to things that if you're straight, you may not have terminology for, or like any way of, it helps you process things that maybe you haven't even thought of yet. Yeah. But she does make a very valid point. First of all, that there should be a content, she makes content warning for like some of the let's see, some of the childhood memories that are represented are not...
Oh, okay. Was there like abuse or...
It's not abuse, but it's pretty clearly neglect.
Oh, okay.
But it's very possible that the author ear doesn't recognize it as that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Or hasn't processed that what Ears representing is neglect.
Yeah.
So
there should be like trauma is subjective, right? Like, so there's a difference between abuse and trauma. Abuse is the actual thing that happens to you that shouldn't have happened. Trauma is how your body reacts to it. Like when you go into fight or flight, fawn, or freeze, like that's your body unable to cope with the abuse that it just sustained, and like that's what trauma is. So like, but everybody is different. Some people can cope with things that other people can't. So something that would traumatize someone doesn't traumatize another. But that's why we have content warnings, right? Because something that might be triggering for me isn't triggering for you.
Right.
But it's interesting that the author, like, it's interesting when you see it happening in front of you in real time. We're like, oh, that would definitely be traumatic for me, but it seemingly wasn't for you. Bizarre.
Right. Like there's a point where you're talking about they were peeing in a friend's yard because they didn't have a toilet available to them.
Oh, okay,
like your family wasn't providing for you in a way, but you weren't able to acknowledge that, or like even in retrospect, you're not like I think often we view our childhoods with like some rose-colored glasses, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that is maybe what was happening here for the author, but the other thing that the reviewer specifically mentioned, and I think fits into this conversation, is that she says, this book exhibits an utter lack of intersectionality, which I entirely feel isn't even something worth criticizing white American writers for anymore, because it's just American culture in some places, if we're being honest. At a few points, Kobabe, sorry, I've not actually said that name out loud before. That's the last name of the author. Lists all the books he's read over the past year, and these are the white ladiest lists ever and a bunch of manga. Yikes. This isn't a criticism so much as a sad cultural truth, and I'm pointing it out because I feel that some black, brown, Asian, etc. genderqueer fam might want to know this before they get frustrated on the overwhelming whiteness of Ear's world. So, and it's a memoir, so like, should you, as a writer, inject diversity into your story? And this reviewer is saying that not necessarily, but it's worth noting in a review for people that might be looking for something affirming. That, hey, this ticks some of the boxes, but it's not going to tick all of the boxes when we talk about people as complex beings, right?
The history major part of me who really, really values like authenticity would not want them to inject false diversity into their memoir. Like if it's a fiction story, that's what you're literally creating. You should inject diversity just from a marketing standpoint, like just from a scummy capitalistic mindset. You should try to win as much of an audience, as big of an audience as you can, and inject diversity in, right? But, and that's just from like this, for the scummiest of reasons, just for like money. But for a memoir, like I would want it to be as authentic as possible to that person's experience. And like if it doesn't relate to you and you're not interested, okay. Like not everybody is going to read a story about my life and find it interesting. And that's okay. You shouldn't interject. Like, could you imagine how messed up that would be if I wrote a memoir of my childhood and I interjected a black best friend? Like,
well, yeah. I mean, that would be absurd because
just silly.
Statistically unlikely where we lived.
Yeah. in Nebraska. Or okay, like
specifically where we lived in Nebraska.
A person of Central American heritage as a best friend. Like it's just dumb.
More plausible, but also that didn't happen.
No. Right, exactly. So it's like why would I inject that into my autobiography, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think that this review is really good. Genderqueer wasn't in Kirkus reviews, which I think is really odd. I don't know why Kirkus review hasn't done a review of genderqueer, but I was glad to find this one because it helped me see a perspective that I totally missed because, again, my default being white. It's like when we were reading The Stone Sky and we didn't know that the moon was missing until it was pointed out to us the moon was missing. Like, it's the same thing, right? You assume, like, if you're in your default, you just assume that everything is copacetic. Yeah. But anyway, and then last thing I want to mention here, there's we haven't really talked on, like, LGBTQ issues, but we're getting kind of long, and I feel like we've focused mostly on whiteness, so I think that that's okay. But we can talk about LGBTQ issues in another episode sometime. Because I think it does deserve its own space.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're interlinked in a lot of ways. But there's a resource called diversebooks.org that I will link in the description so that if you are want to learn more, it will be readily available for you to look up. So and do some digging for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool.
So do we need to address anything else on this topic before we move on?
I mean, I think there are things that I could rant about.
For sure.
But, you know, the file can only be so big for the video right. or the audio. I think it's interesting, though, from a diversity as far as, like, race goes, it's interesting how, like, look at Bridgerton. It's incredibly diverse, but it's based on, like, England, right?
Yeah.
But, like, the Queen is black. So, like, it's but it's a fiction story, right? It's not based on, like, any actual historical figures. It's just, do they say they're in England, or is it like a fictional place?
I think they're in England. I guess I don't know. I've never noticed.
Or do they just vaguely say the Queen and they don't say of England? Like,
I couldn't answer. I mean, I've seen all of it for the most part, but I couldn't answer that question for you.
So, like, but I just mean, like, for a story.
I think the books that it's based on, I believe the setting, these are based on romance novels.
I forgot that. You're right.
I believe that the romance novels are set in England.
Okay.
But they probably are predominantly white.
Yeah. See, for a story like that,
based on when they were written.
Yeah.
But
or it's like it's a fictional story. I think when it's fiction, I think you can pretty much do whatever you want. I think when you start to venture into, like, historical fiction, like, it would, if there was, like, inserted diversity into historical fiction, it could start to bother me a little bit then.
Okay. Black Guinevere in Merlin.
I mean, there's dragons, dude.
I know, it's mythology, but it's like, yeah.
Like,
for the record, does not bother me.
No, it never bothered me for that show. But if I were watching, like, I don't know, I'm trying to find a good example. An interesting example of this is actually this new Assassin's Creed game that's coming out. It's based in Japan.
Okay.
There is a black character in the game who is playable, and there was actually a black samurai in history.
Okay.
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
And he's a character in the game. Here's where my problem is, though. There's, like, when you're playing as him, like, the soundtrack that plays when you're him is, like, this very poppy, like hip-hop sounding, like, Japanified hip-hop, like, soundtrack that he gets that isn't anywhere else in the game.
That seems weird.
It's just, like, it just makes it seem obvious to me that the developers are white and pandering.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're not actually interested in an authentic story about this character. I would love a game about the actual historical black samurai.
Yeah. For sure. But does that need to be Assassin's Creed?
Right. I mean, Assassin's Creed games, they're not historical at all. They're basically historical fiction. But I think it's just silly that they did that to that character.
Yeah.
To that actual historical figure. But anyway.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there's so much more we could talk about on this topic, but
yeah, for sure. We could talk all night.
We could. We're getting close to 15 minutes though, so
we should, I guess, just put a blanket statement of diversity good.
Yes, and we
banning books less good.
Right, bad. Criminalizing the ownership of books. Bad.
Putting content warnings and maybe like controlling like some of the stuff that your children read, understandable. But
yeah, I mean, I think
like you can want to protect your child's innocence and not let them read the Kama Sutra. You know, like
yeah, I don't think okay. So like nothing that is being published as children's literature is being published with the intent to harm children.
Right.
That's ludicrous.
Yeah. Silly.
So that's what I will say about that. The Kama Sutra is obviously not meant for kids.
Right. So you can have like, that's why we have rated R movies, right? That you shouldn't take your kids in. It's the same with books and literature and stuff. We can't talk all night about it though, so maybe we'll do a part 2 of this at some point.
Yeah, maybe so. I do, really quickly, I should have done this at the top of the episode, but we're almost done with reading the Broken Earth series for our read-along. Mm-hmm. We're working on the Stone Sky. We've only got a couple weeks of it left, which means that if you're a member of our Patreon, it's time to get out there and vote for our next read-along. I have the privilege of choosing our selection for this voting poll. Your options are, let's see if I can remember them.
I remember one of them because it was in the last, 3.
Yeah. Okay, we've got the Star Touch Squeen. The
tar touched squeen. No, that's not getting cut.
Okay, the Star Touched Queen. I was so concerned about getting the author's name right that I butchered the title. By Roshani Chokshi.
Okay.
Which I believe I got that name correct.
Nice.
We've also got The Winter King by Bernard Cornwell.
What a
0
name.
for 2.
Bernard Cornwell.
And then we've also got Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. So those are your 3 picks to choose from. Gotta be a member of the Patreon though. So if you want voting rights, go sign up for the lowest tier. You can vote. You can just sign up for this month to vote.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool. Anyway.
You won't hurt our feelings. It's fine.
No, you won't. Of course, you get bonus content over there as well if you're on the next level. But
if you're fancy.
Anyway, Joseph, tell me, what have you been reading, watching, playing?
All right. For watching. Watching Demon Slayer and My Hero Academia. Because those have both been going on. And Demon Slayer just ended this season. And oh my goodness. Wow. Craziness. Still watching Critical Role Campaign 3. Getting caught up now because I was behind. And now I'm caught up. Well, okay, no. I'm not caught up, but I'm working on it. Started watching Delicious Dungeon on Netflix.
Oh, I've seen that. It's on my list.
So silly. I love it so much. It's so goofy.
Awesome.
If you want just like a quirky little fantasy comedy story, hit it up. It's funny.
Love it.
Watching Hunter x Hunter with my buddy Alex. She hasn't seen it yet. We are in the York New City arc now. We are past Heaven's Arena. So
fascinating.
That's been very fun. I also watched Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, you did?
For the first time ever. The one from like 1992 with uh, Keanu Reeves and
Yeah.
Jodie Whittaker. Uh,
Why?
it was there.
Okay.
And I felt like it because I saw Jodie Whittaker and Keanu Reeves, and I was like, huh? I didn't know that movie existed. And it's a weird movie.
Is it? Okay. Okay.
But if you like Dracula, you should watch it because it's fascinating. Vampires, man. So, I feel like I was also just kind of like pre-gaming for the spooky season, you know?
Sure.
So, that's pretty much what I've been watching. For reading, Stone Sky, Broken Earth trilogy, still reading that. Still reading Witch Hat Atelier, and that's pretty much it for me for reading. For playing D&D, that's going well. Nobody's died yet. The dragon egg is still around.
Yay.
Will it ever hatch? Who knows? And I've also been playing Elden Ring because the DLC came out for that, and I have been trying to work my way through a new playthrough to play the DLC with, and it's been very fun going back to that game. So
nice.
Yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Cool. Cool.
What about you?
For me, so for watching, Blake and I are still working on Rings of Power. We've got one more episode.
Nice.
Before the new season. We watched a couple of episodes of Futurama the other night.
Ooh, fun.
Funny. Very good. So Blake's siblings were watching The Mole, which is a reality TV competition on Netflix.
I think I've heard of that, yeah.
With his grandma. And so she was talking about it, and then I was curious. So I watched the first season. The first season was good. The second season so far is not as good. But first season was pretty. Or the first season that on Netflix was pretty good. We went and saw a couple kids movies in theater with Blake and his daughter. We went and saw Despicable Me 4, which reminds me we also watched the Minions movie over Thanksgiving.
Not Thanksgiving. The 4th of July.
4th of July. I don't know where that came from. My apologies. But yeah, Despicable Me 4. It was cute.
Nice.
It was good. Not as good as the first one. But hard to beat that first one.
The first one's really good.
Yeah. We also went and saw Inside Out 2, which was very good. That's what this podcast was supposed to be about.
Ugh.
But Joseph didn't watch it. It's fine.
Leave me alone.
It's fine. Life has been so busy. It was very good. And I think that Joseph will really like it. So hopefully he'll watch it, and then we can do an unpacking video about it.
I will watch it for sure.
I have also been watching My Hero Academia and Demon Slayer. My Hero Academia, oh man. This season is not pulling any punches.
Nope.
The emotional strings
literally
are just getting whipped around.
So many punches.
All over the place. And I've also been watching The Acolyte, which is that new Star Wars show on Disney+.
I forgot about that. Me too.
Yeah, it's really good. I was behind. I got caught up, and I was hoping that it had already had its last episode, and we could talk about it more, because I have thoughts.
There's been a lot of discourse about this show. A lot of negative opinions being shared online, but we should definitely unpack it once it's done, for sure. Yeah.
I feel like when I first mentioned I was watching it, I said something like, I'm glad for like something that's more chill. It's not chill at all.
No.
It's good. For reading, I just finished reading Brazen, Rebel Ladies Who Rocked the World by Penelope, French last name, Bagiu? It's a guess. This, I expected to know more of the women that were going to be featured in it's a graphic novel, and each chapter spotlights a different woman of history that did something cool.
Was Joan of Arc there?
No.
Ah,
I
okay.
expected to know more of the women. I only knew a couple of them.
That's kind of cool, though, that you learned something.
It is very cool. I learned a lot.
You learned many things, yeah.
So, and also the art, like so each woman has like a series of panels, right? Like you would see in a typical, and kind of a similar like art style that Penelope uses. But then at the end of each chapter, there's like an art spread to celebrate each woman. And they're just like, it's so cool. The art is so cool.
Nice.
So, I read that for class. I also read She is a Haunting by, it's right here, by Trang Tan Tran, which I might have been saying her name incorrectly. I apologize. She's a Vietnamese American author. It's a horror book.
Ooh, you're reading a horror book?
I read it for class. It was a
YA
horror. I was supposed to pick a genre that I don't read a lot of. I don't read a lot of horror, but it was very good. I could not put it down. Highly recommend. Also features LGBTQ issues and racism and colonialism in Vietnam, like French colonialism. Like,
interesting. Yeah.
Very good. But also lots of bugs. So
heads up.
Just no, like it's a horror, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm just saying
The bugs eat you.
bugs and ghosts. And then also, of course, reading The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of manga. I have not read it yet.
Fair.
So, for playing, Blake and I played a little bit of Fallout 4.
Nice.
He wanted me to experience Fallout 4, which I did. Baldur's Gate, Joseph and Blake and I were playing all together.
I didn't know if you were going to mention that since we had some severe technical difficulties.
We had some like good. We built our characters. We started the journey, and then Wi-Fi was being dumb.
Yes,
it happens. Princess Peach Showtime. Blake's daughter is still really enjoying that, and it's been really fun. So, nice. I will get back to my playthrough of it eventually, but right now we're focusing on hers. Mm-hmm. We played some Jackbox with the Fam Bam. With Blake's family. And then for board games, we played Beat the Parents yesterday. Blake and I were the parents, and his daughter got to be on a team with her grandparents. The kid questions, way easier than the parent questions.
No way.
And considering that she had 2 full-grown adults on her team, but she beat us. And nice. It was great. It was fun. And they were like, man, we're really glad that our questions are the kid questions and not the parent questions. We attempted apples to apples. Doesn't quite work with a 6-year-old.
I think there's a kid's version of that.
Yeah, there is. We didn't have it. We need to get it. Because I think that she would really enjoy it.
I think so.
But the cards were there's too many people.
Yeah, like she doesn't know who Genghis Khan is.
Apples. Yeah.
She doesn't know who Hillary Clinton is.
So that was my first play, and it was her turn to pick, but the card was rich, and all of my cards were junk, but I had Hillary Rodham Clinton, and I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
She is rich.
Mm-hmm.
But... And then,
speaking of card games, I do want to say we played Magic while...
Yes, that's what I was just going to say. While Joseph and Hope were up back in Nebraska, we played Magic the Gathering, the 4 of us, and that was super fun. Can't wait to play it again. Yeah, it was great.
Mm-hmm. Fun times.
So, that's all I got, though.
Nice. Cool. Well, we wrapped that up in good time.
We did.
Nice.
We did.
Alrighty. Well, I guess next week will be a read-along, and by the time this comes out, the next one might be like the last one for this book. I don't know. Maybe. Mm-hmm. So anyway, again, if you want to vote for the next one, go check out the Patreon. If you want to check out the article that we referenced a lot in this episode, check that out in the descriptions and all the places, whatever.
Sure. All the things.
Yeah.
It'll be available to you.
So, I guess until next time, go read something cool and diverse.
And yes. Support diverse books and authors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we'll talk at you next time.
Later.